You need to learn Windows Autopilot right now. Windows Autopilot streamlines device onboarding remotely, so that means you no longer have to manually configure individual settings or individual applications, as well as even maintaining the OS image itself if you're still doing that today. With some of the latest settings, you can even configure the device to automatically patch during the out-of-box experience before the end user can actually start leveraging that device. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the full magic of Autopilot, including how to set it up step by step. My goal by the end of this video is to have an Intune environment that's set up brand new, where you have the out-of-box experience configured for the users. You're going to automatically set up the Microsoft 365 apps on that device, sync and connect the user's OneDrive to that computer, as well as deploy all the security settings like Microsoft Defender antivirus. We're also going to be enrolling our first Autopilot device and seeing the end user experience firsthand. By the end of this video, I guarantee you'll save at least 1 hour per device that you're onboarding. Doesn't that sound awesome? Let's go ahead and dive in. Okay guys, so before we walk through the actual step-by-step configuration in the Intune Admin Center, first I want to walk you through a typical example just so you can see the power of the architecture of Autopilot, but also the amount of time you could save with this as well too. So we have this hypothetical company called Northwind Outdoors, and they're a very fast-growing company, but they only have 2 employees here, 2 technicians that are actually going in and configuring devices for the new employees that are being onboarded. This format here might look similar to what you're doing today, but they go ahead and they procure new devices from an OEM provider like Dell or HP. They have them shipped directly to headquarters, where they actually unbox those devices and they boot them on and start to configure them. They'll plug in a USB to load the ISO with a pre-configured image for that Windows device. And then they'll additionally spend more time configuring additional settings, setting up the applications, making sure they're installed, as well as configuring and making sure all the security settings like our antivirus or our endpoint protection software is on those devices and working and streaming back from a telemetry perspective as well too. From there, they'll actually repackage that device and ship it out maybe to a remote employee who can then boot it up and log in to be productive on their first day of work. Now, the key thing here is, while I went through that very fast, this actually could take around 2 to 5 hours depending on the deployment. And that's a lot of time when you talk about one single device taking that long and doing some repetitive tasks maybe that you do for multiple employees in the organization, like installing the Microsoft apps or making sure their OneDrive's connected to that device, as an example. So as we shift and take a look at this new architecture here, leveraging Intune and Autopilot, Intune acts as our main store. And this is where we're going to configure not only and manage all of our devices, but it's also going to house all of our configurations, such as our applications that we're going to deploy to devices, our security settings that we're going to push out, the individual settings that we would leverage as well too, like defining what the lock screen setting is going to say on the device. But we also can leverage that to patch these devices and manage their patching cycle all from one location. So if we were to zoom out here and take a look at this from a side-by-side comparison now of what we're doing differently, we're still going to go through the same process, obviously, of procurement from the OEM provider, but the key difference here is this forks off into 2 different workflows. We have this workflow that's going to be integrated that you'll see here today. We can actually procure and upload directly the hardware IDs, hardware hashes, directly from the OEM provider like Dell into Intune, which basically says, hey, this is a unique ID, unique thumbprint for these devices that says that they are owned by my tenant, by my organization, and they're going to live and integrate into Intune. And then from there, you're actually just shipping the device to the end user. And so instead of having to ship it to HQ, configure it, unbox it, repackage it, ship it back out, they're actually just getting the device sent to them. And in Intune, all you're doing is that these things are already pre-configured, such as the apps, the security, the patching settings. So all you're doing is either assigning that device or the user, the employee record that's going to be stood up here, into a group. And based off of that, they're going to have these assignments pushed down to them that define the out-of-box experience that we'll get into, as well as all those configurations. And so when the user boots up that device, all of that will actually push down remotely when they connect to a network such as their home Wi-Fi. Even as part of this, and they're then productive in about 30 minutes to an hour. And you'll actually see some of that end user experience that we'll walk through today. But the key thing here is that it's all hands off. From an administrative standpoint, when you get to this state, there's going to be some asterisks in that I'll get through here. But when we talk about the time savings alone that you can get in doing this, especially if you're onboarding, offboarding a lot of employees, it starts to add up very quickly. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the Intune Admin Center, where we start with step 1 for configuring the Autopilot deployment, which is first setting up a group here that'll act as our container for all the assignments that we're going to make. Okay, so we're here in the Intune Admin Center. This is more of a brand new Microsoft tenant. The first thing that you'll want to do here is we want to create a group for all of our active assignments that we're going to be making, so we can say, hey, this device or this user needs to be applied this out-of-the-box experience policy. We need to assign them these settings, these applications, etc. So you can come in here and just call this something like Windows Autopilot Devices. You can give the description if you want. And in this case, I'm just going to make the membership simple with assigned. You do not have to actually add any members at this point in time. You could do different things here if you wanted to make this more of a dynamic group moving forward, or dynamic device. As an example, within here, and define certain criteria based off of tagging, but it's a little bit more advanced than what we're going to go through today. So for the sake of this example, I'm just going to go ahead and create that group here, which will show up here as Windows Autopilot Devices. The next thing that we want to do is set up company branding. This will give the user a more tailored experience with even custom messaging that I'll show you guys here that you can create as part of their out-of-box experience. Back on the Microsoft side here, you'll go into the Entra Admin Center, and in the left-hand nav here, you'll scroll down until you see this custom branding, which is what we're going to configure today. I've already pre-configured this as part of this example to show you within this demo, but if you click into edit here, this is where you'll be able to upload their logo as an example as part of a background image. And within here, you'll even be able to select even the page background color if you want. So I'll let you guys play around with this. It's not too overly complicated in the sense of what you need to do here. But on the sign-in form, you can even do things like customize the sign-in text page, which I'll point out when we go through the end user experience. This one just says, "Welcome to Northwind Outdoors." When you're done here, you can simply click on Review and Save, and then save to complete the process. A lot of previous videos you've looked on the internet today is going to go walk you through a process of harvesting a hash from the device itself after you boot it up, and then uploading it and going through the out-of-box experience again. I want to actually show you guys a different process that I leverage all the time for net new devices that actually doesn't require you to boot fully all the way through that experience to gather that hardware hash. So let's actually see that on a physical device here. Okay, so this is a PC that I have here that we're going to be using as our Autopilot device. You'll need to boot it on and go through this basic workflow of the out-of-box experience where we're selecting the language, the keyboard layout, and we're going to skip this here for now. The basic thing I need to do here is be able to connect to a Wi-Fi network, so then I can use a remote connection to upload this into my Intune environment. So we'll go ahead and connect here. And as I move on here, before going through the full out-of-box experience, I can actually just press Shift and F10. This will go ahead and open up the command line tool where I can actually just go ahead and type in PowerShell.exe. And from here, I'll link the article from within the video description here, but we're going to run a few commandlets here as part of this process that you'll need to run in order to install this module for Autopilot connections. And then we're actually going to upload this programmatically into our tenant. From here, we're going to run the command Get-WindowsAutopilotInfo, and then we're going to use the parameter of -online, which is going to open up a prompt for us to connect to our Intune tenant. You do need to be a global administrator in order to be able to consent to this process here. So we'll wait for that pop-up to occur. Okay, now I'm being asked to sign into my account, so I'm going to use that account to go ahead and log in. From here, I'll go ahead and sign in again with my name. And then you'll see here that it's going ahead and gathering this serial number from this device, and it's going to go through this process of looking to upload it and import it into our Microsoft Intune Admin Center. Okay, so now we see this message here that says 1 device is imported successfully and gives us a time elapsed. So now let's go ahead and pivot back to the Intune Admin Center to see if this worked. Okay, so back in the Intune Admin Center, I'm here under Devices and then Enrollment, and I'll go back under Windows Autopilot Devices, and you'll see here that that laptop that we just uploaded manually there is listed for us to be able to review. I can click into this and I can see some of the properties around it here, and I can even do things like give it a device name or even select a group tag, which is what I was mentioning you could potentially do in order to automatically get it added into that group we created if you use a dynamic group. Too much to go through in this episode though, but one of the things that I like to do right off the bat here is go ahead and assign it to the user here that we're going to leverage and have as part of that device, just so you can see that. It even gives us this user-friendly name that you'll see as part of the out-of-box experience. When we go through that, I'm gonna go ahead and call this Nick-PC as an example from within here, and I'm gonna go ahead and save this. Now, you'll notice here that the main thing that this says is the profile status is not assigned. So that's the next thing that we're going to go ahead and create to define the out-of-box experience. Okay, so to define this, we're going to go back into the devices enrollment section, and we're going to click under the deployment profiles here. This is where you're going to create your autopilot profile that will define the out-of-box experience. You can see I already had created one there. So you can name this something like default Windows Autopilot as an example within here. And then the setting for convert all targeted devices to autopilot would be to say, you've already enrolled some Intune devices into this platform. They're not autopilot devices. There's a distinction between the two, but you want to go ahead when you make the assignment to say that these devices are targeted. So the next time those are factory reset as an example, they'll go through the out-of-box experience and they'll pick up this autopilot profile, basically eliminating you to have the need of going through the process we just did of uploading that device manually. So we've got some settings here that will configure for out-of-the-box experience. In most cases, you're going to do user-driven. Self-deploying is more built for kiosk devices, things like that. And then you can have the devices join as Entra joined or hybrid. Autopilot fully supports a hybrid deployment as well, which I've done separate videos on, but you're going to go ahead in most cases also select Entra joined. And a lot of these default settings that they've set to hide, you're actually going to keep because likely you don't want to show that to the end user, such as the software licensing terms, the privacy settings, and so forth. And this one's a big one here where you're defining the user account type. So in this case, they've also defaulted this to a standard user, which is what we would want as part of the regular users that are going to be provisioned through this service. And then allow pre-provision deployment basically allows you to exit the out-of-box experience and go through the device and system contacts to make sure all the apps and settings are installed. I've typically only used this whenever I've had more complex settings that I have to deploy or applications that are more built in with a lot of complexity in mind, like a line of business application, right? As an example within here, versus just saying, no, we can successfully push all the policies and apps that we're going to configure in the Intune portal. So you want to automatically configure the keyboard layout, and then if you wanted, you can configure a device naming template, which is giving you some examples here of saying, hey, we could have consistency in our naming conventions, but it's up to you if you want to do that. I've already named this device, so I'm not going to go ahead and do that as part of these settings. And then this is where you can add your assignments. So you could say this is going to apply to all devices, but I'm going to go ahead and assign that to the autopilot devices group that we made earlier here as part of this. And one of the things that we want to do now that we had this policy in there, we'll go ahead and create this, but you recognize there's still nobody or no device in that group that we had created. So we're going to go back over into actually the group section here, and we'll go into all groups and we'll select the Windows Autopilot devices, go under members and add a member here. And this is that autopilot device that we just set up as an example from within here as well too. The other thing I want to point out to you guys, if you go into the Entra Admin Center, just as an example, you'll notice that this device is now joined here as well. It doesn't know anything really about it yet because we've just uploaded that hardware hash, and it's got this little symbol here which signals that it's an autopilot device, and the naming convention is just these numbers, which is the serial number as part of that device. You'll see that automatically update as we go through this process, but just wanted to call that out. So now that we've got that profile defined here as part of that experience, if I go back under devices and enrollment, I can go under the devices section here, and I can see this is still not in an assigned status, and I can go ahead and try to, go through a sync process or refresh this. You'll see this move from not assigned to pending to assigned. As an example, it does take some time though, so I'm going to check back in about 10 minutes and we'll see this profile status update. Okay, so we're back now, and if I go ahead and click on refresh here, we've got the profile status went from pending to assigned, if you just saw that there. So if we click into it here, we'll see again that this is assigned. We've got the name already that we've assigned here. Now, before we actually go through and reset the device and go through the out-of-box experience, we want to go through the exact configuration as I was alluding to at the beginning of the call when we talk about what we want to push down to that device. So within Intune, it's beyond the scope of this video to go through all the individual configurations that I've set up here, but I've gone ahead and set up some profiles here that'll set the default lock screen timeout to 15 minutes, the default Wi-Fi settings to connect to the corporate network as an example. And then I've also got OneDrive known folder move set up so that it'll automatically connect to the user's OneDrive and start syncing their desktop folders and files as well too, like the pictures, documents folder, things like that as part of this. So you've got your settings over here, and we've also got applications that we've set up here within here, such as Google Chrome, very high use case of being able to push out the browser, as well as the Microsoft 365 apps that will load as part of this. And then in the Endpoint Security section here, we're going to go under the antivirus section, and I've also got a Defender antivirus policy that we're going to push out. So very cool that we can house all these again, and all these are going ahead, and I need to go set them up to be assigned, in this case, to our group that we have within here. So if I go ahead into the assignments, we're going to go ahead and add our Windows Autopilot devices group here and go ahead and click on save. And you'll do that for each one of those policies because that's again where that Autopilot device is located. I wanted to show you those settings though, because the next thing that we're going to do is set up the Enrollment Status Page settings, which basically defines what the user can do as part of the enrollment process. So if I go back here in the Intune Admin Center under Devices and under Enrollment, you scroll down under the Windows Autopilot section here, and you'll click on the Enrollment Status Page. Now you could either create a new enrollment status page, or you can leverage or modify the default policy. That's what I'm going to do as part of this video here. But effectively here, when I go into the settings, you have this configuration that you can show here, which is basically saying, what does the end user see when they go through the out-of-box experience on that device as part of this, as it relates to all of the installation here. So we can say, hey, we want to show the app and profile configuration process. You can define a timeout period. This is something that you might want to adjust depending on how many applications you've pushed down to the devices. After your testing, how long those actually take to load. And you can actually show them a custom error message here where you could say contact your support person, maybe actually include a phone number or something like that as part of that. And then you want to go ahead and turn on the log collection and diagnostics, and then only show page to devices provisioned by the out-of-box experience. You can show and say this yes or no. You'll actually see this page as we walk through that experience. This is where I was mentioning at the beginning of the video. It's a newer setting by the time of this recording at least, where you can install the Windows updates, which actually might restart the device, but I always like to say that is on. And then this is a setting, if you click on yes or no here, it'll open up these other settings. So by default here, we're going to say that this is no, which is block device use until all apps and profiles are installed as part of this. But you can actually configure this to yes. And the reason you might want to do this is if you're deploying security settings as an example, or security applications, such as a third-party endpoint protection application, you'd really want that to be fully installed before you actually have the user starting to interact on that device as an example of that. And so within this, you can give them additional configuration if you say yes here, which is to say we can allow the users to reset the device if an installation error occurs. You can allow users to use the device if the installation error occurs, or, as an additional setting here to scope this, by default, we're saying that all applications need to be installed that are assigned to that user or device before they can start using it. Or you can say that some apps are selected as part of that. So you might want to say, hey, I want to make sure Google Chrome in this example, not necessarily what you would do, but this might be a blocking app, for this as well too. And you can say only fail selected blocking apps in technician phase. And that's if you're going through that out-of-box experience is kind of tied back to that enrollment profile. So I'm going to leave these settings as is just to show you this experience as part of the end user setup. And so let's go ahead and review and save here. This policy was already scoped to all devices, so I don't have to change up the assignments there. And so now we're actually ready to pop back over to our physical device and go through the out-of-box experience and see what the end user experience will actually look like. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and see the end user experience. So I'm back here on this device, and we're going to go ahead and just run this command in PowerShell to go ahead and restart the computer. So as you'll see here, the device is automatically now going and checking for some updates as part of if it needs to go through any type of patch cycle before we go through the out-of-box experience. And this is where it's mentioning, hey, you may go through some restarts here as part of this process. So now as this has come back up, we've already got this message here that just says, let's set things up for your work and school. And it has our branding that we put on there as well too, as far as the messaging to this employee. And then all they need to do here is put in a password to go ahead and sign in. And now what you see here is actually the enrollment status page that's part of this process here. So this is what we said in our enrollment status profile that was going to happen once you go through this. And you can expand these settings here. But effectively, this is basically walking through all of the things that we said we wanted to basically preload in this process before the user can actually set up this device. So you'll start to walk through and see these things check off. Depending on how many applications, as an example, that you push out, you'll go ahead and start to see these things update, and that's how long it might take as far as the given process. So go ahead and do some fast forwarding from a video editing perspective till we see some of these status changes. Okay, we're back and we fast forward a little bit here to show some of the completed steps and some of the ways it's working through this. So we've completed the device preparation step here, which does also some things here like joining to our organization's network as that Entra join device as an example. And then it's working through any of the configurations here, such as our Wi-Fi profile, our security policy for antivirus, and it's working through installing that required app that we had, which is Google Chrome, as part of this, which is why it's got 0 of 1 here. So we'll pause again and be back when this is in more of a completed state. And so now we're here on our desktop, and you'll notice that we've got Google Chrome already installed here. We've got our Office applications already actually deployed here as well too. I already installed those, even though we did not make that a requirement as part of this process. And the only other thing that we'll notice here, if we let this go ahead and load, if I open up File Explorer on this page, we've got OneDrive here, but it's not fully connected just yet to our actual OneDrive. But let's just wait here for 1 minute here and just not actually configure anything, but we'll let this actually load for just a few more minutes. Okay, so I fast forwarded to here, but that was only like a minute. And we can now see that I'm connected to my OneDrive as Nick. If I click in there, you'll notice here that I've started to get my cloud sync going in this sense for the attachments folder. As an example within here. Okay, so now if I pop back into the Intune Admin Center here, if I go under Devices and Windows Devices, I'll see my PC here, and I'll go ahead and click into it. It's possible that the status is not brought all the way back here, but I have all of my management functions now that this is in here. If I go under Managed Apps, I'll be able to see that the M365 apps and Google Chrome app is installed. And then if I go under device compliance, I'll have my default device compliance policy in error. And I think that's just because of propagation, honestly. You'll see that propagate soon enough. And then under device configuration, we've got our profiles syncing here for Wi-Fi and lock screen as part of this. And then if I go into endpoint security and antivirus, you'll see our Defender antivirus policy here. It doesn't look like this one's actually checking in just yet. It's one of the ones I've seen take a little bit longer time to check back in the portal, but we have just one setting configured as part of this as well too. So pretty cool experience just to see all of that come through. And then, by the way, back in here, I'm back in the Entra portal. We just refresh this here. We now have that renamed, and we have the telemetry coming back. This is an Entra join device. We've got the enablement, the Windows OS version, and so forth. and we see that it's mapped into MDM here with Intune. Okay guys, that's everything I had for you in today's video. Definitely comment with any questions you have about Autopilot. And I also want to hear comments from everybody out there who has some struggles going through the Autopilot experience or any errors you see. I've highlighted the basic bare bones here, but there's a lot of different deployments and we all know that these aren't perfect. So I'd love to hear any of the deployment errors or struggles that you go with Autopilot. Hopefully I can make a secondary video based off of that. All right guys, I'll see you guys next week.